everyone. Today I'm going to be reviewing the novel The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. It is a classic hard-boiled detective novel written in, I think it was 1939. Anyway, the edition that I read was from the Library of America, and it's in an anthology, and I bought it from Barnes & Noble. When I go and I read novels, I first go out and I look for some critical reviews of the work. And I did that in this case as well. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I found out about Raymond Chandler's personal history. And it comes into play in his writing. So, he was born in 1888 in Chicago, but he lived a lot of his life, early life, in the United Kingdom, and he was actually a naturalized British citizen. Now, oddly enough, during the First World War, he didn't fight for the British or the Americans. He fought in the Canadian Expeditionary Force, and he fought in the trenches. So he wasn't in the background, sucking on a tea and sending stuff forward. He was actually in the trenches fighting. And this is what the critic says is important to understand about his personal life. And what he says is that because of his experiences viewing death and dead bodies, he writes, Raymond Chandler writes really creepy descriptions of dead bodies. And he does. I mean, they're really vivid, and they are really creepy. So when you're reading through his works and you read these descriptions that are very direct, I can guarantee you that because of his personal experiences and his with close calls of death and whatnot, that these are very realistic descriptions of bodies, and it really adds realism to his writing. The other odd thing I found about Raymond Chandler is that he didn't write novels until he was 44 years old, The Big Sleep being the first one. So, I think he only wrote 7 novels in his lifetime. So he starts when he's 44, but that still does not prevent him from becoming one of the 2 most beloved authors of this American genre. The other one, of course, being, what's his name? Dashiell Hammett, who's also up on my bookshelf behind me. But the book itself, The Big Sleep, was published in 1939, and it introduces Philip Marlowe. Now, if you read the genre, you know that the 2 most famous characters are Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe. So this is the Philip Marlowe character. His writing has a very distinctive style. It's noir, so it's dark, it's rainy, it's shadowy. The dialogue is very hard. It's full of put-downs and the like, insults. But the thing that a reader first time to this genre might have difficulty with is some of the slang and some of the very odd descriptions, which is really the telltales of this type of genre. So for example, gat. If I say I have a gat, you have no idea what I'm talking about unless you read this stuff and go, oh, a gat is a pistol normally, it's a firearm. The same thing with an iron. I'm not going home to iron something, I'm going with my iron to go shoot somebody. They also use very odd descriptions, and I had to stop once and think about a particular description I thought was funny. I was kind of laughing. I was like, what does that mean? And it was buttons. He called somebody buttons. It's like, buttons? And then I thought, oh, police officers of the day had these big uniforms with big buttons. So he was referencing, in kind of a snide little way, police officers. So that was kind of interesting. He also uses some expressions that are odd, like I said. For example, at a certain point, he says, 2 hammers struck the wall. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. Well, it's not hammers. There was 2 shots that sounded like hammers hitting the wall. So you have to kind of read into it a little bit and kind of figure out what he's talking about. And the other thing is they sometimes use sayings we don't use anymore. For example, in Dutch. If I say, you're in Dutch with your mother, you're supposed to, what's that mean? Well, back in the day, that was a way of saying that you're in trouble with. I'm not sure of the origin of that saying, but I do know its meaning. So this can slow you down as a new reader, but that's also the very essence of the environment and the enjoyment of reading these types of novels. So, generally speaking, so I don't want to give away any spoilers, the environment of a noir novel is its lifeblood. And you know what? Raymond Chandler is one of the masters. The environment that Raymond Chandler sets up is very seedy. It deals with the seedier side of life. You're not going to like any of the characters you find in this book, and Marlowe is the least not likable character in it, but that's part of the fun of reading it. So, and then tied into this dark environment, you have really seedy things of life going on. You've got a illegal pornographic shop selling porno books. That's Geiger's bookstore. You have blackmail over nude photographs that somebody took when they gave the victim Mickeys and knocked that person out, and then took these lewd photos of that person and then blackmailed that person. You have illegal gambling and debt. You also have murder by multiple peoples in this story. And that's, you have revenge killings by a homosexual lover. You have rejection or murders because of rejections of sexual advances. And you have really these cold-blooded murders that just enjoy killing people. And all this stuff is mixed together in the beginning of the novel, which really goes to the form of this particular work. So you're introduced to all this mess, and Marlowe is just thrown into it. And his job is to pick all those little elements out of it and say who's guilty of what and resolve that particular issue so that he can get and do his job at the end of the day. So in the beginning of the novel, it's a little bit confusing because all this stuff is happening, but it all becomes clear as you read through it. And that leads to one of my major points. Now, one of the things that I did is I was reading again through the anthology, which meant, normally when you read a book and you're reading it, and you kind of know how far you are by how many pages are left. I didn't know that because it was in the middle of this anthology. And that was very odd, because I got to a certain point in the story where I thought, oh my God, this is the climax. And sure enough, all sorts of things got solved, people were arrested, blah, blah, blah. But then the book kept going. And I was like, huh. And that's because all he did is he took half of that evil apple and he solved half of those particular crimes at that point in the novel. But I had a novel climax, and then I had a little bit of the slide at the end, but then it picked up again because there's still the other half of the evil apple that he had to unravel and solve. So in reality, I kind of got two novellas in one, and they were all tied together by the main impetus for the action, which was Marlowe's getting hired and his client who hired him, which carries you through to the end of the novel. So it was a most enjoyable read. I loved the language. You just can't beat it. It was great. Now, I did something very fun and different also with this novel, so I've never done this before. But I happen to know that William Faulkner, who again is one of my favorite authors, wonderful skill, use of language, his descriptions just drip off the page. William Faulkner is just great. But I knew that he was in Hollywood at that time, and I happen to know that he helped adapt The Big Sleep from the novel into the 1946 movie starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to say, well, what did he do? How did he deal with this, and how did he translate it? So I got the movie and I sat down and I watched it with the book open right in front of me, and I'd flip from scene to scene to see what they'd actually done. And here's what I found out. First off, they combined a lot of the secondary female characters into the Lauren Bacall role. And they did this primarily I think for two reasons. Artistically, they did it to keep Lauren Bacall on the screen more during the course of the movie. Because otherwise, if it stayed with the structure of the novel, she would have been in the beginning, once in the middle, and then maybe once at the end. So when they blended those characters, she had a point almost throughout the whole movie. She was on the screen much, much more. And I think from a business side, they probably saved money by not hiring extra actresses. I mean, just to be frank. So that was very interesting how they meshed those characters together. I also found it interesting that there were scenes in the movie that did not appear in the novel. And that's because they were giving Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, who were a favorite movie couple in America at the time, an opportunity to flirt on the screen with each other, which is what the audience really wanted to see. And so they gave the audience what they wanted. So these scenes are unique to that movie, and for me it added a little bit of depth to the movie, and I'm a big Humphrey Bogart fan anyway, so it was just great to see him up there exchanging these witty dialogues with Lauren Bacall. So I appreciated that aspect of the movie. It didn't detract from the original novel, from my perspective. The thing that I really liked about the adaptation was that the dialogue in the novel, in many, many, many places, was lifted directly from the novel. So the rhythm of the speaking, the rhythm of the dialogue, the tones, the essence of it was not lost when they adapted it to the main screen. And so I thought that was a really great thing for the writers of the script, William Faulkner, Leigh Brackett, and Jules, is it Firthman? I think it's Firthman. So they did a really good job, and they were really true to the novel in that regard. Now, the thing that I think they had a lot of problems with is that, remember, this is a novel about the seedier side of life. And in 1946, we had really strong censorship of movies. So they couldn't talk about things like pornography and homosexuality and, you know, a woman that had a really strong sexual appetite, blah, blah, blah. And so watching how those three writers adapted those elements into the movie was very curious, and they did it in very subtle ways. For example, and I won't give away the character, but one character is dressed in such a manner that if you were living at the time and paying attention, you would go, oh, that means this person is this type of character. Almost like, you know, in the old cowboy movies, you put on a black hat, you're the bad guy, you put on a white hat, you're the good guy. And so you have to kind of look for these things in the course of the movie to see that that's really what they're talking about, because they weren't allowed to talk about it directly. Now, personally, I didn't find that it detracted from the movie, so I still enjoyed the movie, and obviously, I enjoyed the book. So I highly recommend the book, The Big Sleep. And I do recommend, and I'm not getting paid to say this, by the way, guys, but I do recommend getting the version that's from the Library of America, because what this group does, it's a conservation group, and they save these writings, and they make sure that they're available for people over time. So they spent a lot of time and effort putting together Chandler's works in 2 volumes so that everybody can enjoy them. They were at risk of being lost to the public. So I do recommend that particular edition, which I found on Barnes & Noble. And again, I'm not getting paid for that. I just, you know, when people are trying to save our culture and preserve it, I think that's a great thing, and we ought to support them. So, but I highly recommend the novel. Sharp dialogue, shadowy and dark. It's just so much fun with the language and the slang and the descriptions and the crookedness, and you know, you just can't go wrong reading Raymond Chandler. So that's all for this time. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.